Live?
You're live.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hello everybody, and welcome to Insights from the Fold. Insights from the Fold, yeah. And welcome to the summer. You know, the summer months are always different, and as you might remember, we're still a little technologically challenged right now, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be a drawback. And so,
hi, Pete.
Hey, Pete. Thank God you're here. Glad to see you. I'm sorry we're a little late getting started, but always good to have a chance to talk to our good friends. And I'm sure other people will join us soon as well. And this is the beginning of the
Pete said he almost gave up on you.
Oh, he wouldn't give up on me. I know he wouldn't. But
he was waiting for me to finish cooking the steak and crab cakes.
yeah. So it was for a good cause. Ty was doing some cooking, and I was trying to figure out how she does it.
Sorry.
Now, what did you do?
Pete said wind noise.
Oh, okay. Maybe because you got a fan blowing right on the side of the phone. That would do it.
Let's see. Did that help? Or do I need to turn it off?
It must have helped, because the only way you could have actually heard that is for the wind to be blowing right on the microphone, which is probably what was happening. Wow. Ty has made herself her own little tripod. And speaking of which, I saw something which I may actually include.
Great. Thanks, Pete.
Oh, good. I saw something that I may actually include in a later video concerning the selfie stick, because I have to understand that the modern generation does all kinds of crazy things, and they got these little sticks that hold their cell phones up so they can get pictures of themselves, and they become like tripods. And I saw this video. One of the things I torment myself with, because I do have a mild fear of heights. I saw a video of some people climbing a German radio tower, and they got to the top, and actually both of those idiots stood on top of the radio tower, not within the railings. They actually stood literally on top of the radio tower and held up their selfie sticks so that from a perspective of the phone, you can see the stick going down to their hand, and they're standing there literally balancing on the pole, like the upper poles of the radio tower, thousands of feet up. There are some things that I would never do, and that is one of them. Some people have an incredible, I don't know what you would call it. That kind. I don't think I'd call it bravery, because a brave person wouldn't do that. At the same time, I'd like to call it stupidity, but I don't know if I can call it that either.
Can you hold this at arm's length?
Oh, what is going on now?
I see that fly. It keeps zooming in.
Okay, Ty is about to murder a perfectly innocent fly.
It's not innocent.
It's not been proven guilty, has it? It's America, for heaven's sakes. Some countries in the world, they don't have that luxury. And now I'm curious. Oh, she missed it. She missed it. And here I thought we were going to get it on video.
Oh, man. That was...
Okay. Now, I have to say, our podcast contains some very different points of view.
Go ahead and land. Go on.
And I have to admit, this is something I was not expecting to see happen this illustrious Thursday night. But a fly hunt as opposed to a snipe hunt, whatever you want to call it. And so now, well...
I'll put the stakes back in there, though, because I don't want it.
Okay, the stakes are high. Well, now the stakes are lower because they're not on the ground anymore.
Right, but I'm keeping that swatter right there so I can get it.
Okay.
There he is. He's taunting me.
Okay, so now, all right. Where is he? Where's she going for? Where is she
He's
going?
in the exact same place.
Really? What does he like about that place? Let's see.
I'm sure I got him.
Well, you stunned him.
Oh, no, I got him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, what did you see? Fly guts in the fly swatter?
Yeah.
Okay, it's funny. This did have something... Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I got it.
This did originally have to do with science fiction. At one time, our podcast was about science fiction and about writing. It's hard to imagine how it is gradually degenerated into what it has become today. But at least we can have fun doing it. Okay.
I got him.
Okay, so
There.
Actually, we have to have a whole episode about that sort of thing. I don't know.
Swatting flies?
Well, about maybe alien pests or something like that.
Wow.
Or alien vermin could be another topic. Or what the sort of vermin one might encounter in space. Because I'm quite sure that there are quite a few good examples.
Pete says it's getting more like the Howard Stern show every episode.
Well, as long as it still works.
Tori says fly, die.
That's good.
Yep.
Okay, and this week I'm going to start making my announcements concerning the fourth book, which I will let everyone know that when that's on the way. I have to establish exactly when it's going to be released, the release date, and start working up a viable marketing model. And I think it'll be worth the wait. Because honestly, I like this one. It's good. It's a little bit different than the previous book. It's a little bit bigger, but not by all that much. And so that's why it still works.
And welcome back, Tori.
Hey, Tori. Nice to see you again.
I hope you and Pete have had a great week.
Yeah, definitely.
Did we have a great week?
Well, I think so. I mean, it wasn't bad.
It's Thursday already. It was just Monday.
Yeah, well, we spent most of this week getting over the previous 2 weeks that we were traveling.
Oh, so it takes 2 weeks to recover from the 2 weeks?
No, it probably takes about a week to recover from.
Well, it's been more than a week. This is the second week, almost.
Really?
Yeah, Monday would be 2 weeks.
Okay, well, in that case, I've lost track. But that's part of the problem with dealing with being a professor, not having quite as much to do in the summertime. But we will bounce back.
And Pete's been putting in his garden.
Great.
It must be still pretty, kind of cool there, as opposed to our 104-degree days.
Yeah, that is the one thing about North Carolina that, yeah, I'm still taking some time to get used to.
It'll cool off a little bit, though, because that was actually really hot temps this early in the season.
Yeah, we don't usually get it quite that early, although that said, the weather has been kind of weird these last couple of weeks with all those tornadoes in Ohio.
Was it Ohio? Or was Kansas?
I'm pretty sure it was Ohio. Well, actually,
I guess it was Kansas too, though, right?
Well, Kansas, well, that's not too far away, but they also had, some other issues as well. So, we didn't happen to see any of that sort of issues while we were traveling, but prayers go out to people who are in danger zones.
Tori says this week's it's not so much of a great week. Day job has murder by stress and overwork in the mind.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yep, and,
the grind can do that.
Yep, I know exactly what that is, and that's one of the reasons. I can tell you that before summer vacation, the professor has the grind ×2.
And Pete says he has to be careful because they can still have frost, even this late.
Really?
Well, I still remember that article your mom showed me from that newspaper. I don't know how many years ago it was, decades probably, but you guys had a blizzard in Massachusetts on Mother's Day.
Actually, well, is Mother's Day in April?
May.
Yeah, we did. We did have a snowstorm in May.
Yeah.
And I remember the problem was that the trees had already begun to bloom.
Yeah,
And
that'll
so,
do it.
yeah, they ripped all the branches off a lot of the trees. That was a killer. That was a long time ago, though. So I mean, weather's weather. It does weird things sometimes. That's for sure.
That's true. What kind of vegetable are we gonna have?
Oh, now you're talking dinner. Okay, well, before you go off on that tangent, let's at least steer things back a little bit towards the topic at hand. To make sure that we at least touch on that. During our little time together.
Vegetables are important.
Okay, well,
human children don't want to eat them. I doubt alien ones would want to either.
Okay, well, the topic was the idea of alien adoption, and I'm going to open that up a bit to also include, adoption as pets or as surrogate family members. Even though I think we already did space pets, I think some of the similarities may be worthy.
No, I think we did our pets in space. I don't think we did space pets.
Okay, well, I guess the idea is, though, is it possible for, let's say, an Earth family to adopt a child of another species?
I would that I could, Pete. He says he wish I need to adopt a cook.
Well, actually,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, she's a good cook.
I like to cook. I just never feel like I have the time to cook.
cook.
No, I do like to cook. I used to love to cook. It just now that I have other things that require my attention, I don't like it as much because I always feel rushed to do it. And I don't have time to be as creative as I would want to be.
Well, I mean, I suppose it all comes and goes and depends on what's going on. But you're a good cook, I will say that much.
You better say that.
Well, of course I would. I got in
So,
trouble.
so you're not telling the truth.
No, it is the truth. I told you that enough time. You got to start believing it by now. But anyway, if you look at the concept of what adoption is, you know, what do you think of when you think of adoption? You think of basically finding somebody who, for one reason or another, needs a family situation, and you provide them with basically your family's legacy. And so this person becomes a brother and sister to your children, and an adopted child, so that you could, in many ways, be responsible for their care for the rest of their lives, or the rest of your life anyway, because typically children outlive their parents. Although in this situation we can't be sure.
That's what you can't be sure. They could have a lifespan of like 7 days. Or like that annoying girl from Voyager. Cass.
Oh yeah, she only lived for 4 years.
That was 4 years too long.
But actually, I mean, that's part of why we're talking about this.
Tori has cats.
Oh, I didn't know that, Tori. Excellent. We have cats too. In fact, we got more cats than we know what to do with right now.
No, we don't. We just have the 2 little baby kittens. They were just so cute.
Yeah, we got the 2 little baby kittens ripping everything to shreds, and we got Domino, who still hates our guts.
She doesn't hate my guts.
Okay, well, anyway.
She
whatever.
purrs for me now.
Well, every once in a while, she doesn't immediately run when she sees me, so I consider that a compliment. But I'm remembering a movie I saw when I was a kid, which I have no idea how I'd find it now. It was one of those National Geographic specials. And the crux of it is, during the, let's say the 1950s or 40s, if you had an American Indian orphan, how they would be raised by a white family. You know, they actually had this show where basically, you know, you're teaching, you know, an Indian boy, you know, how to live in the Western world. You know, if you try to put something like that on TV today, you would have an outrage, because they would say that's cultural murder, or whatever you want to call it. And honestly, I can definitely say that from my standpoint watching it, I thought that they were kind of hard on the Indian people. And the fact of the matter is, if someone actually comes from that lifestyle, you don't try to pull that away from them.
Actually, I think that's horrific.
Well, that's exactly what they were doing.
We're not meant to be a homogenous society, even with our cultural beliefs.
Well,
so,
yeah.
That's awful. But
And
that's
so,
often what happens, because
if you start with that,
human nature.
then the first thing we got to think about is, how can we apply this to science fiction?
Oh, that sounds nice, Pete. He walks in the woods with his crazy dogs for relaxation. And Tori's a really good cook, but he's just not fast enough for Chopped.
For Chop.
Yeah. And
Is Chop like a show or something?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
It is. He says it's not mood, it's having to do 4 jobs, 3 plus mine, because people out a victim of my own... Oh, because he's a victim of his own competence.
I know how you feel. You know, I work myself into a position where I can't turn over the reins. You know, I find that, I mean, not to brag, because it really isn't bragging, but there are some times when I'm on a video shoot, I'm the only one that actually understands the equipment, and so I'm the only one that can do it. And so it's kind of like I send the students out to do something, and then I find that they're plugging the headset cables into the camera, thinking that they're audio cables, and it's like, no, that doesn't go there. And I had somebody manage to plug the power cable back into itself. It's like, why would you even think to do that? But that's okay.
Well, Tori's pulling us back on track and says, as to the subject, adopting a non-human sentient, sure, there would be a lot of considerations. And Pete's advising Tori to take a day and be totally incompetent.
Yeah.
There would be a lot of considerations.
Well, yeah, there would. I mean, well, first of all,
I don't know if I could.
Do the aliens have another culture, and can we somehow, well, what culture would that be, and can we respect it as the person doing the adopting? And
would they care? You see, there again, the problem is not necessarily, well, yes, there are obviously lots of logistical problems, but in the past, when it comes to settling in other areas of the territories, we are pretty intolerant of other people's cultures and beliefs, and that respect seems to not factor at all. So I would doubt seriously, in our current environment, in our current thinking, I don't think we would give much thought to an alien's culture.
Well,
we would just expect them to behave like us, which might be impossible.
I would tend to think that that's the approach we would take. You know, right or wrong, that's the approach we would take. So it doesn't actually have to be a value judgment. But I want to make two comparisons real quick while we're on this part of the subject. And bless you.
Sorry.
There are two movies that didn't actually include adoption really, but they could. The first one would be Alien Nation. I know some of you have seen that movie. Not everybody likes it, so it's kind of like a little bitty tiny treasure that not everybody remembers, where you have the newcomers who are basically aliens who are very different than we are physiologically, but they resemble humanoids. And one of the reason I'm bringing that show up is because if you were to do an alien adoption, that would be one way to do it, because they try to be us.
Which is not necessarily good.
Right, so
maybe that we should try to be like them. I mean, I guess that really depends on what kind of society
that never came
it
up
is.
in the show. They appeared to be deliberately rejecting their former culture.
Well, that's because humans wrote it.
Well, yeah, but I'm just hypothetically.
Humans think that we're superior. If you're a Christian, then you're superior. If you're a Muslim, you're superior. It's the perspective of whoever is creating the piece. Doesn't mean it's true, though.
Well, of course. But if you were looking at those particular types of aliens, I would say that they would be a lot less problematic with that type of adoption than say the other possibility, which would be District 9. It's like if you look at District 9, there you have basically aliens who are completely subjugated by humans and have virtually nothing to do with us, and they will not mix. And so if you were to abduct...
hey, Pat.
What did they call them?
I don't remember.
The District 9 aliens?
I don't remember. It was an utterly depressing movie.
I seem to remember they had a name like the Creole or something like that. But whatever they were, let's say you were to abduct one of those and try to raise it as a human, I just don't think that would go well. I don't think you could do it. I don't think you'd be thanked for it either.
Well, Tori says you'd have to think about things like cultural preservation, language capabilities, nutritional, natural mannerism. Pete tosses in medical, love, and something from Tori.
Yeah.
And Pat just joined us.
Hello, Pat.
And Pete says lobster bugs? Is that what they call them in District 9?
They may have used the word lobster, but I'm not sure if that was... I'll have to watch it again at some point. But yeah, it was a very depressing movie.
I think it would be disastrous.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact is, if you were to try to raise one of...
prawns.
Prawn, yeah, that was it.
Yes.
They called them the prawns, because
Prawns.
prawns are basically another word for shrimp, or type of shrimp. Yeah, the British would use the word prawn. We would probably say shrimp. And so, yeah. But yeah, I would think that if we're talking about aliens like that, it would be a lot more difficult, because all of the things that Tori brought up would definitely come into play, and that there'd be all kinds of physiological differences. Could you even figure out what to feed them?
Well, hypothetically, I think we're talking about species that resemble us enough that you would even consider it. Like, for instance, in your earlier books, no one's going to adopt a Syikes. It's just not going to happen.
Well, the Syikes, they were so psychologically different than us that it was very hard to communicate.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That if you're actually talking about alien adoptions, I think we have to have the foregone conclusion, though, that we're somewhat similar. And so
I would argue that the prawns are actually the closest we're likely to come to similarity. I think that if we meet aliens, they're probably going to be something like that.
Maybe.
Or something that's on the other extreme, so radically smarter than we are, that they'd be the ones adopting us.
Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe that's why there's so much space between us, because we're actually very similar. What about ones like the tribbles that multiply when they eat? Yeah, we get to think about stuff like that.
Well, that would be another factor.
Of food.
So if you were to, let's say that you were to adopt an alien child, and then you discover that that alien child will become pregnant within a few days and have triplets, and then those triplets will have triplets of their own a few days later, and that's how the species, that's normal for them. Then is that something that you're prepared to deal with? Is that something you even can deal with?
I think I would be more interested in the why would you want to.
Well, that's another factor altogether. Why does anyone want to adopt?
Oh wow, that really depends.
It does, doesn't it?
It really depends on the person. Sometimes because they have a lot of love to give,
Yes.
and they are unable, or they simply want to. They just have a lot of love to give, and they want to add to their family and add to it. Someone who doesn't have a home, but then you also have some people who do it for like a merit badge
Well, I
to show
guess
how
that's
open
kind of
and
what I was
multicultural
getting
they are.
with. Like, for example, the whole idea of adopting the Russian child or adopting the Chinese child.
Well, at one point, it really felt like some celebrities, especially, were treating it like a Pokemon game. Got to get them all.
Yeah, and I would say that that would be exactly the wrong thing to do.
But if you were talking about alien adoptions, I would argue that I don't see whatever I don't understand the other motivation because surely there are plenty of human children who also need homes. Why would you choose a galactic one?
Well, I would think that the only right way that that could work out would be, for example, the story Enemy Mine. Some of you might remember that one with the guy that currently advertises insurance. What's his name again?
Oh, well, Allstate guy.
Yeah, the guy that's
Yeah, I can't think
basically.
of his name though. I see his face, and I know I'm in good hands, but I can't think of his name.
Yeah, well, anyway, Enemy Mine, the idea there is you have the humans and you have the Dracs. And the Dracs are a single-sex alien. And so basically they don't get married, they basically just have children. And so they sort of, like, one day they just get pregnant and they have a child, and then that gets added to their line. And so, the human made friends with the Drac, even though they were enemies of war. And the human adopted the Drac's child, who was called Zamis, and how even though the Dracs and the humans were so different, he was in a position where he was the only possible caregiver, and he risked his life to save Zamis from the evil pirates.
Well, Tori says, what if the reason is due to a cataclysm, and we're fostering them to try and help them not go extinct as a species? And then he follows up and says, the adopted generation is more about saving the species. Let their children and grandchildren seek to reclaim the culture. Well, I don't know. I often feel like once we get involved, they won't have a culture to seek. Because
That's a possibility.
we tend to, I even see it in Star Trek, which I'm pretty sure is not, maybe it wasn't first and foremost on the writer's mind, but you have the Federation. They're obviously from Earth. They go around with open arms to all these different species. They take them on as crew members. And then they collect tokens of their cultures. And they hold them up like prizes or, like they appropriate it.
Actually, I'll go the other way as well. If you might remember that one particular Star Trek episode, I believe it was called Almost Human. And that was when they encountered this subculture, this alien ship with a bunch of people. I think they were kind of like the Cardassians, even though they hadn't invented the Cardassians yet. It was kind of like that, kind of like wannabe Klingons.
Is this the original series?
No, this would be the Next Generation. And basically, Picard finds a human child in amongst them.
Yeah, and the grandmother's an admiral or something.
Yeah, and basically that child is there doing his wolf call, oh, and he will only respond, to the Captain Picard's orders because they live in a very male-dominated society. And the whole idea was the entire crew was saying, well, you got to get this poor human away from those bastards, back to civilization. And finally, Picard was the one that stood up and said, "Hey, wait a minute! These people raised him, and if that's where he belongs, if that's where he wants to be, then it's not our place to reverse that." And so I would say that there has to be at least some recognition, that whether you consider a culture above or below the American culture, it's still a culture. There are people living in other countries, and they may have ways that we don't understand, and vice versa.
Well, Pete says we tend to raise our young with our own cultural influences, and we frown on those that are different. And that would be my biggest concern. I just don't see us being all that delicate or trying to introduce both, or even if we even know what the culture is. I guess it depends on how we came about. Like in the case of Tori's example, something cataclysmic happens. We may not even know what their culture is. But my heart tells me it wouldn't actually matter, though.
And going back to what you were saying, also, if you look at the way the Puritans interacted with the Indians, the Indians were considered savages,
Of course. It was incredibly cruel.
Yeah, and they're...
And the Spanish and the Aztecs and the Mayans, the same
the thing is, it's not that they couldn't proselytize, meaning that they could proselytize to the Indians, but they were trying to make the Indians basically become Puritans, which I don't think...
But they weren't proselytizing. They were condemning and trying to convert.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And it was also, and it was hinged upon their own survival too. Mm-hmm. Meaning that if you weren't going to convert, especially I think a lot of it was Catholic, you don't get food, you don't get preference, you don't get land, you don't get... So it wasn't like you had a choice. Yeah, that wasn't sharing your faith. That was domination.
That's what I'm saying, and that's what we would hopefully avoid if we were in that similar position again.
We never have before.
Well, hey, I can hope, right?
That's why you write.
Yeah, that's why I write.
I see no evidence that we've changed, though.
Well, not so far. Not so far.
No. We exploit.
And at the same time,
we may actually call it salvation or love or open arms or something like that, but it's not.
Well, also, we think that a technological advantage also means a moral advantage. Meaning that, let's say that the Puritans had gunpowder and the Indians didn't. That didn't mean they were better than the Indians. That just meant that they could shoot them. You know, or they introduced certain types of agriculture to the New World, whereas the Indians might have preferred hunting and different types of agriculture. And the result was that the Puritans were basically ruining the Indians' land by turning it into farms, and the Indians would have preferred that as hunting ground. I mean, that probably came up at one point or another. And so it does become a culture clash.
Humans by nature tend to shun the other, and those not like us. Some humans have evolved beyond such tribal instincts. Most of us have as yet not. Yeah. I certainly can't judge every single person, but as a collective, I know we haven't.
As a collective, we got a very bad track record. And that probably applies more across the board, too, because heck, the Europeans did that.
Well, I said humans.
Yeah, I would also say that the Russians have done that.
Well, there's no one who hasn't. So.
Yeah.
So Pete wants to know, Paul, is it possible to have Ramo adopt a human? And if so, how would you write it?
Well, actually, yeah, in many ways he could, only because I don't know if he would call it adoption, but he would. He tends to be loyal to his friends. See, Ramo and also to some extent Relas, they basically they get very attached to those who they care for, and they would try to protect them, and typically they would try to do what's in their best interest also. And so I would think I could write a story like that, or it does happen. In some ways, it kind of did happen with Peach in the first book, because he sort of became kind of a de facto guardian for her. You know, he became sort of like an uncle, you know, because she had a father, but she didn't have a mother, and it was Ramo that was trying to protect her, because he tried to keep some information from her, or protect her from knowing things he thought would be traumatizing for her. But yeah, I could easily see Ramo finding someone who needed help and ultimately helping out. And you're going to do that again, aren't you? Okay.
We had the door open earlier.
Okay, so somehow we're going to continue this discussion while Ty goes fly hunting, which is okay. Now, interesting, it's not fly fishing, it's fly hunting. And okay, I heard a snap. Did that go anywhere?
I didn't see him fly away, did you?
No, I didn't fly away. But by the way, that's one of the things we found about Fayetteville, is that for some reason we tend to have a fly population here, which we didn't have in Sanford, which isn't that far away, really. Sanford, I think we had more mosquitoes, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and so I've actually, it's not that it's an impossible problem to solve. I mean, we do have ways of dealing with it. But I've seen more flies than I'm used to seeing.
You really got to fix this tap thing.
Yeah, I know. And it probably needs a new washing. And so that's another thing that the crew didn't necessarily have to talk about.
Huh?
We got a leaky kitchen faucet.
Oh, yeah, I got to do it just right. I want to eat a Reese's.
Okay, so you're going to eat a Reese's while I'm holding the phone doing your job, right? Alright, so the camera operator takes a break. Okay, union rules. Okay, there you go. Okay, try it.
So, let's see. Pete says the soap queen is on the rampage. Hey, that'd be a weird soap. Extra exfoliation.
Yeah, it could be.
Kay's comment to Will Smith's character at the start of Men in Black is a perfect illustration.
Yeah.
Remind me what he said.
Maybe I misunderstood. Men in Black, that does talk about some rather interesting alien, and of course,
He's a little smarter than he looks.
Yeah, and you know, not to do spoilers, but then you find out the relationship between Will Smith and the other major character. What was his name again? The older fellow.
Yeah.
Trying to remember, because it's not. I think there's an initial in it.
Yep, I can't remember it.
Yeah, right. He was also
my brain is just not quite clicking yet.
The older character from Men in Black. I keep on doing this. He was also in a western that I saw recently called The Homesman, which I have to admit was a fascinating movie. So very interesting character.
And Pat says Reese's always helps her kill flies.
Yeah, that would do it. That would do it. Okay, so good point, by the way, for Pete, in that if you consider adoption, it doesn't even necessarily have to be organic species, but artificial intelligence, that sort of thing. At some point, that could become part of the.
But can artificial intelligence provide love?
Well, that's the whole idea. That's the whole idea. Maybe they could. Or maybe it'd be the other way around. Like, for example, well, actually, that brings up a point. The movie AI. The very first scene in the movie AI, for those of you who remember that movie, really had the entire story encapsulated in it. When I believe his name was Hurd, the scientist.
Mm-hmm.
See, I don't do well with celebrity names, but he's a good character. John Hurt, I think, is his name. I'm pretty sure that was the actor. He was essentially the father of David, the AI character. And so he had basically said he's going to create a boy or a son or a daughter that will love the customer as the parent. And at one point somebody said, well, doesn't that sort of imply an obligation that the parent will love them back? And so basically the John Hurd character said, well, didn't God initially make Adam to love him? It's a very interesting concept. You know, and so I would say that, like for example, people have those digital pets that they got to feed, otherwise they die and stuff like that. You know, I would say that there's at least some potential here for humans adopting artificial pets or artificial whatever, and trying to see how well they can care for them, if it makes logical sense or not.
Pete says My Robot was about adopting a robot, wasn't it? I've never seen My Robot.
I don't think I saw that either. But I'm sure there's some good examples of that.
I can think of a lot of movies where robots inspire emotions in humans.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. But then, what? Oh, usually you tell me no, you don't want to eat on camera, so I wasn't gonna waste my time. Oh, okay. Let's try again.
She's found another one. Okay. Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share this with you guys.
Okay, got it. Oh no, I still see him.
Okay, so she's going after it again. So this is called bantering.
By the time I get it off the thing. Oh, this is by the time I get the stupid thing off the hook, it's gone again.
Well, don't put it back on though.
I saw it. Hello. Hey.
Okay.
She's hungry? Okay.
Okay, we're almost there.
Yeah, well, there it is.
Okay, and the search is on, and... Okay, probably not.
There he is. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so She's going to show me the dead fly.
I am. Just a second.
Just to make sure that we know that it's dead.
This.
And so this shows the barbarity of the human race. Yep, here we are. Yep, I see it. All right.
Yeah.
She's proving
I did it. Ha.
Yeah. And she feels good about herself because she destroyed an animal that had no idea that he was even here.
Hold on one sec.
Okay, so we're still live, Ty. Okay, so we're still talking about dinner at the same time, which that's part and parcel with me. So does anyone, even though I can't read the questions at this moment, does anyone have any other thoughts about, well, I guess what we were saying last?
Are you trying to, no, I got asked, the people are asking questions. Wait, hold on 1 second.
Okay, I'm holding on 1 second.
You have fans? Want to know about the fly?
Paul doesn't train these weeks on his science fiction writings.
Okay.
And so, he gives us some practice.
You're going in the wrong direction, Ty.
I know. Well, I have to get your mom some food.
Okay.
He's lucky. Luckily for
Okay. Being left in a tight spot, but that's okay. All right. So while we're waiting,
I appreciate you.
so we can talk about some of the other aspects that come up. We talk about physiological differences. You know what possible alien surrogates would like to eat, and we're talking about mechanical differences. You know whether or not we would have robots as potential pets or adopted children. And I do think AI was a good movie, by the way. That's a good example of that. But also, how about this one? The original Planet of the Apes series, where they talked about adopting gorillas and chimpanzees as pets, and then they became servants, and then eventually they became basically a slave class. And then at a certain point, and I believe it was the fourth movie, they basically take over the planet and they become the apes that are basically running the world.
Okay.
Okay, so that would transition us into kind of like we were talking about before, whether or not we humans are subjugating others.
All right, let's see here.
Whether we're subjugating others or whether we are genuinely
Oh, Robin Williams playing a robot. That was Millennium Man.
Yes, that was a good one.
That was good.
And he did have a pet. He had a dog. And he had to make sure to feed the dog because he didn't need to eat, but the dog did.
And Pat said, I think if you could grow affection with anything, artificial animals or pets would have pros like no accidents in the house. I think for me it would be more that they don't die. That's the really hard part.
Well, but you do, though. And so eventually they would have to live life with that. Well, for example, David in AI, he asked his mother, you're not going to die, are you? And she said, well, not for a long time. Well, how long? He said, 50 years. And so then he asked his teddy bear, is 50 years a long time? And the teddy bear said, I don't think so. And so, I mean, it's all relative. So a pet with a longer lifespan than a human would have to face the fact that they would not always have us, and so they would have to be bequeathed to somebody else, kind of like a time lord. They can't always stay with their, like the object of their affection.
Pete says he'd hate to see me go after a mouse. Oh, what is this when people come in and want to eat?
Well, fortunately, we don't have mice in this house that I've seen.
No.
Although I did hear a joke.
Can I feed you too?
Where someone said, my work is hard, almost as hard as that cheese tray I got my fingers stuck in. And no, that was a mouse trap.
Oh, Data and his cat, yes.
Yeah, Data had a cat.
I like Data so much.
Oh, yeah. Data was one of the best examples of an artificial intelligence that I've seen.
Okay, well, dinner's mostly ready if you want a crab cake.
So, Data and his cat.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't know how you can have a dry eye in the house.
Who?
When Data found his cat after the ship got destroyed.
Yeah.
And how he cried because he was so happy that he found his cat. That was a beautiful scene. You gotta admit.
Try not to, make sure there are no shells.
Okay, so Data and his cat. And so, what other examples? can you think of?
No, that wasn't sure.
So we got,
You like crab cakes?
well, of course, well, not that it's quite the same thing, but Captain Archer had a dog that he took care of, and the surgeon on the ship would go out of his way to protect the dog and make sure that the dog was healthy, even though it may not necessarily have been their primary mission.
Bye. Okay.
So
All right.
yes, we do.
Love
we
you
do.
too.
We do love our pets, and we do love our adopted friends and family.
And Han Solo was Chewie's third dog because
Oh,
Wookiees
yeah.
live like 400 years.
Why wouldn't I have remembered that one? But yeah, which yeah,
And robots, no dirty clothes to wash. Yay! From
that's
Pat.
true. That's true.
Unless they deliberately made themselves dirty because they want to emulate humans.
Well, that could be. They could be unnatural or artificially dirty if they want to be. Does anyone remember Super Dennis? He was a robot that advertised super denims, and they would say Super Dennis was rubbing his butt on the grass, getting them all dirty.
What?
You know, Super Dennis is testing the genes. And
No, I don't know that one.
But then he had a sister named Super Denise who would do the same thing. But yeah, we love artificial intelligence, and the potential is incredible.
You know, I have to find those two scamps too. I haven't seen them in a while.
The two what?
The two scamps.
The cats?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, well, what else? We have adoptions. So we talked about the cultural issues. We talked about physiological issues, and we've covered a great deal of ground. I think we all basically agree that that humanity as a culture is very selfish. So let's turn it on around the other way. What if you found yourself an alien pet? What if you were captured and the alien decided that they were going to domesticate you? How would that work? See, one of the examples we have is that Twilight Zone episode about
The zoo.
well, the zoo, but the better one was when those two people found themselves in that empty town of Centerville. When they got on the train kept going back to the same place because basically they were in some kid's train set and they had become the child's new toy, which is actually a neat idea. So let's say that that your alien master.
Pete said he would poop on the floor. And Tori says, have you watched Love, Death, and Robots?
No, I haven't seen that one. It sounds familiar, though. I'll have to keep an eye out for it. Love, Death, and Robots.
Had somebody else clean up for a while.
But if you were, let's say, well, here's one question that I think would be a good opener. If you knew that your master was several thousand times smarter than you were, would you respect that alien as being a higher authority than yourself? Or would you simply want to get back to where you were and feel that you deserve to be free? Or would you say, maybe I'm better off under their guidance?
That has not proven to be the spirit of humanity, though.
Oh, not at all. But if you look at it from the dog's point of view, the dog will see their human master as their superior.
But we're not dogs.
Clearly we're not.
Right.
The cat will never do that, but they'll see the human master as a meal ticket.
Tori says it's on Netflix. It's an awesome group of shorts.
Okay. Let's look at that.
No, I honestly can't see a human not having any issues with being dominated, even if pampered.
Well, I guess the other way of looking at
Now,
that...
it'd be different, though, if you kept them long enough and maybe you could try to, well, I don't know. I would say breed it out, but then you look at slavery, and children of slaves still wanted to be free. They didn't know what Africa was, where they came from, but they didn't want to be owned by somebody, even though that was the lifestyle they were born into.
Okay, well, let's take a step back. First of all, I do have one example about that. The movie 2001, the book 2001 by Arthur C. Clarke, essentially David Bowman becomes a captive in some futuristic holding cell. He's given what looks like a luxury hotel. All the food is basically this blue stuff, but it comes in packages that look similar to what he's used to. And he's got old magazines that look like they've been badly copied. But someone has tried to create an environment for him so they'd be comfortable, but he clearly is not. He is not considered an equal with them. But let's take a step back and say that we now have another culture superimposed over our own. And right now, whether we like it or not, America is the dominant culture in the world, or at least one of them. And so there are people in, well, let's say India, that say we should go to America to seek our fortune, that sort of thing. Would you go to Proxima Centauri, for example, to be with the Sikhs, if it was possible that if that was the center of civilization, if we knew that that's where it was happening, would you be interested in being the kind of like the tail of a dog as opposed to the head of a rat? Or would you rather live here knowing that this was kind of like a backwater as far as civilization was concerned?
I'd still say that humanity would strive for freedom. I mean, it's what's kept us going. Ingenuity, creativity, individuality. Pete says that might be because the white kids around them were free, but if no one were around you was free, would you know the difference? I would argue that in some cases they never even saw who was free and who wasn't. I mean, it was a strict order, and it's like dogs. Some owners train their dogs, and some owners aren't as strict. But I don't think that one dog looks at the other dog and says, "Well, gee, I wish I could be that dog," or vice versa. It would still be, or even now when kids play together and they're raised in different ways, they only know what they were raised in. So even if they saw other kids that were free, they would not understand the concept. They only understand it as it applies to themselves and the people that they aren't intimate with, their family structure and unit. So, no, I think it's the human spirit, honestly.
Okay, so in that regard, now you mentioned freedom and the days of slavery, but I don't think we'd be in chains if we were to go to the alien overlord's home, because at least not physical chains, but we would be restricted, meaning that there would be places we couldn't go because that wasn't our business, and we may not be able to speak the language, and we may not have the same rights.
Well, but that was the civil rights movement. Places that you couldn't go, doors that you couldn't use, and yet you could shop. You could have your own place and a home in your own area where other people who look like you also have to live. And there were no shackles then, but that wasn't freedom. And
well, yeah.
They never thought it was, and they fought against it. So even in the place where the chains are.
But this would be because they had abilities we didn't have. So if they could fly, it's not their fault that we can't. And if they can calculate things 1,000 times faster than we could, it's not their fault if we appear stupid in comparison.
Right, but they probably wouldn't let you sit at the table with them.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
That's the same thing. You're still being kept, and you're still being prevented from doing something. So that's still a type of bondage. Even though I don't think we're able to establish equality amongst ourselves anyway. But I certainly don't think that we would want to be subjugated individually under anybody's control.
And of course,
whether we could help it or not is something totally different.
That also takes us back to Star Trek Enterprise with William Archer, and of course you have the Vulcans, who were essentially holding back humanity.
Yeah.
And so they would not help humanity develop. They would simply manage humanity, make sure that we weren't getting too close to the dangerous secrets, that sort of thing. And so, for example, the alien overlords, maybe for our own good, would be trying to shield us from things. They wouldn't necessarily let us play with phaser weapons and things like that. Or computers that can tell us things that we shouldn't know.
Well,
because they'd be
benevolent
afraid that we'd
ownership is
accidentally
still
just
ownership.
hit the wrong button and blow ourselves up.
Benevolent ownership is still ownership.
Oh, you're right. See, that's why we're having this conversation, because it's the God's honest truth. See, in many ways, it would be a horrible thing if humanity discovered a neighbor in space that was more advanced than we were.
Pete says, I have 2 dogs here. One I've had from birth. The other is a rescue that I got last year. They're both 10 years old, and after a year, the new dog has the same attitude as my lifelong dog, so one was influenced by the other. But it makes me wonder how my first dog would be if things were opposite for her.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because behavior, some of that is learned. It isn't all automatic. Some of it is learned. Actually, I read something the other day where somebody was saying, apparently, about 50 years ago, there was an experiment where some family adopted a chimp, and they were trying to raise it with their child, trying to see if they could get the chimp to act more like a person. What was happening is their child was beginning to act more like a chimp. So that's kind of interesting. So that kind of goes to what you're saying, Pete. And yet more distractions. You got more people coming and going, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I think everybody's come in here.
Oh, I thought you would have bought me some vanilla so I can have my floats. You do?
Okay, so does anyone have a potential topic for next week?
Oh, that's fun. Next week?
Yeah, let me just to think ahead. Does anyone have a potential topic for next week? So we haven't completely rabbit trailed this one, but I'm sure we've come a long way.
It wasn't my fault. I don't think I rabbit trailed much this time at all.
Well,
Hi, Paul's mom? Nope, wrong mom. Pete, that's my mom.
yeah.
We got 2
Although
moms
both
here.
are here. Basically everyone's here.
But we'll tell Paul's mom you said hi to.
Certainly will.
And Pete says your next book release. He wants to talk about your next book release. Did she eat it?
Okay. That would actually, that's a potential topic. We could talk about how it relates to the other books, the purpose of it, without spoilers, of course. But yeah, we can do that. We could talk about the release of the Ray Lost Verdict, and because I'm actually looking forward to getting that out.
Oh, a nice shot of Ian's underwear.
Oh, is that Ian's underwear?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll just...
Pete says hi, Mom.
What?
Pete says hello.
Hello.
Okay, so,
Why are you blurry?
why am I blurry?
Oh,
That's your phone.
oh, there we go. I don't know.
Okay, well, at this point, it seems like we've got so much activity going on around here that we might want to wrap it up.
Probably. Pete says a book review of sorts.
Fine, dear. I didn't see a vehicle up there. I
I
said,
appreciate that. Pete.
must be you.
Okay,
So,
guys.
we will say goodnight now.
Yeah.
And, we're all getting hungry and everyone's getting restless, and if we don't stop pretty soon, everybody will be in this kitchen. So I will see everybody next week at the same time, and I'll post everything, and everybody have a great week.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining.